Welcome to Leadership Winston-Salem's Community Conversation. My name is Catherine Perry, and I'm the Executive Director of Leadership Winston-Salem. So glad all of you could be with us this morning. Before we get started, I'd like to thank each of you for making time to engage in this important community conversation and transitioning to this virtual format. While the weather and road conditions were not in our favor, I'm grateful that you all could join us as we discuss the issue of affordable housing in our community. At this time, I want to extend our sincere thanks to some very special people. To Claudia Barrett, Warrenetta Mann, Brittany Albert, Randy Wooden, Ned Erickson, and Jennifer Brown, members of the Leadership Winston-Salem Alumni Council, and our Alumni Engagement Director, Abby McCall, thank you so much for your hard work on planning this important conversation. I'd like to also recognize our event sponsors, the City of Winston-Salem, Habitat for Humanity, Robert Half, and The Resource. Their partnership and commitment to our community make conversations like this possible, and we're grateful for their support. I'd like to take this opportunity to also give a special welcome to our elected officials who have joined us today. Mayor Pro Tem Dee Dee Adams, City Council Member Vivian Joyner, City Council Member Annette Scipio, Forsyth County Sheriff Bobby Kimbrough, Forsyth County Commissioner Tanya McDaniel, Forsyth County Commissioner Gray Wilson, representing the Village of Clemens, Councilmember Randy Wooden, and representing High Point City Council, Patrick Harmon. And a special greetings also to Assistant City Manager Ben Rao and Forsyth County Director of Public Health, Joshua Swift. At Leadership Winston-Salem, we believe in educating, connecting, and energizing leaders to serve and improve the community. And that meaningful change starts when people with different experiences, roles, and perspectives come together to listen and to learn. Today is about exactly that. We hear the term affordable housing often. It sounds straightforward, but as many in this room know, the reality is far more complex. In Forsyth County, nearly half of renter households spend more than they can afford on housing. For many families, the gap between wages and rent forces difficult trade-offs between housing and healthcare, transportation and childcare, or savings. These challenges affect not just individuals, but our workforce, our economy, and the overall vitality of our community. Today's conversation is not about blame, and it's not about easy answers, because there are none. Instead, it's about understanding what affordable really means. In our local context, examining the data alongside lived experiences, and exploring what's at stake if we fail to address these challenges together. As we engage today, we ask that the conversation remain respectful and constructive, and that we honor our panelists and moderator who have generously shared their time, expertise, and perspectives. Thoughtful questions and differing viewpoints are welcome, but we ask that all dialogue be grounded in respect. Thank you again for being part of this conversation and for your commitment to building a stronger, more inclusive Forsyth County. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Pat Pate, City of Winston-Salem Manager and Leadership Winston-Salem 2024 alum. Pat was sworn in as the 6th Winston-Salem City Manager in November 2023 after serving for 10 years as the City Manager in Manassas, Virginia. Pat previously served the cities of High Point, Greensboro, and Winston-Salem in management and financial roles. Pat is an ICMA credentialed manager and has served as an adjunct faculty member and lecturer. He holds a BA degree in political science and religion and a Master of Public Administration degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He has completed executive leadership programs at the JFK School at Harvard University, the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service at the University of Virginia, the School of Government at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the Center for Creative Leadership in Greensboro. Pat has been active in local and national civic, religious, and professional associations, including serving as the president of the Virginia Local Government Management Association, the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada, and the North Carolina Local Government Budget Association. Thank you, Pat, for joining us today.
Thank you, Catherine. It's a pleasure to be here and to be a part of, I think, what's going to be an outstanding panel for everyone to hear. So join me now. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists that are going to be here before we start with the discussion. First is Richard Angino. He is the owner of Third Wave Housing. This is a team that specializes in development of both new and historic multifamily properties. Richard has been on the development side of the industry since 2004 and has developed 20 properties which contain over 2,100 units. Prior to moving to this current role in the industry, he held various senior executive positions on the investor and equity syndication side within the tax credit industry, which involved funding over 450 properties. Most recently has completed a couple of projects in the area, Essex Place and 600 Peters Creek, both in Winston-Salem. He also has started an advocacy group in Winston-Salem called Folks for Good Housing. So that is Richard and Gina. Next, let me introduce Reverend Dr. Alvin T. Armstead, Jr. Dr. Armstead is the senior pastor at United Metropolitan Missionary Baptist Church. He is a dynamic and visionary leader dedicated to preaching, discipleship, and community transformation. Under his leadership, the church has strengthened its mission to exalt, enlist, equip, and engage a thriving intergenerational community of disciples. Committed to making an impact beyond the sanctuary, the church has launched innovative initiatives to serve the broader community. A hallmark of this leadership is Metropolitan Village, a $65 million real estate development designed to foster hope, health, and housing accessibility in Winston-Salem. Thank you for joining us, Reverend Dr. Armstead. Next, let me introduce Gina Fisher. Gina is the director of the Restore operations at Habitat for Humanity of Forsyth County. In her current role, she oversees all Restore locations and leads efforts to strengthen sales, operations, and community engagement in support of affordable home ownership. She previously spent 13 years with the YMCA of Northwest North Carolina, advancing from camp counselor to director of child care services and earning a reputation for strong leadership and operational excellence. During that time, Fisher became a Habitat homeowner, an experience that inspired her to join Habitat Forsyth professionally. She began as store manager for the Peters Creek Restore and was promoted to director of Restore operations within 2 years. Gina's journey from Habitat homeowner to organizational leader reflects her deep commitment to helping families achieve stability and opportunity through home ownership. Gina, thanks for being with us. Next is Ted Ortiz, who's the executive director of Aspire. Ted began as executive vice president of operations at Aspire in September 2024, where he oversaw public housing, housing vouchers, development, and maintenance programs. In July 2025, he was promoted to the executive director. Raised in public housing in Pueblo, Colorado, Ted has spent his career in housing and human services. He previously served as executive director of the housing authorities in Pueblo, Colorado, and Lafayette, Louisiana. He holds a bachelor's degree from Colorado State University and a Juris Doctor from Western Michigan University. He also served 8 years on the Pueblo County School District 70 Board of Education, but we haven't asked him to run for the Board of Education in Forsyth, including 4 years as board chair. He brings a resident-centered leadership approach to Aspire as the organization advances major redevelopment and preservation initiatives. Thank you, Ted, for being here and for what you're doing, leading public housing in our community. Finally, Dr. Angel Wright Lanier, who's Assistant City Manager in Winston-Salem. Dr. Wright Lanier is a dynamic executive leader with more than 20 years of experience across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. She has a strong record in public administration, program management, and communication, leading large-scale initiatives, managing multi-million-dollar budgets, and advancing policies that drive organizational growth and community impact. She has also served as executive director of the Network of Schools of Public Policy Affairs and Administration, where she led an international membership organization advancing education and public policy and administration. She has a Doctor of Education from Vanderbilt University and a master's degree in Management Information Systems and Public Administration. So that's our panelists, and I did that quick so that we could give them more time to talk on our panel today. So first, we're going to start our panel discussion about just the general question of affordable housing. So when we talk about affordable housing, what does that mean in practical terms for Forsyth County, and who is being served or left out? And so I'm gonna kick this off by asking Ted to start off on that one.
Thank you, Pat. So as you know, Aspire is formerly the Housing Authority of Winston-Salem. We created the acrostic for accountability, service, perseverance, integrity, respect, and enthusiasm. That's the acrostic for Aspire. As many of you know, we are the largest affordable housing provider in the jurisdiction. We have roughly 1,500 public housing units, and we're authorized to administer 4,500 housing choice vouchers. For public housing authorities across the country, we're kind of the ecosystem for deep affordability. Our programs kind of operate where our participants don't pay any more than 30% of their gross income, which is deeply affordable. And then we're working with other developers and partners to build mixed development communities that offer low-income housing tax credit rates at 60% of area and median income. And we're trying to address the affordability in that respect. Obviously, we can't do it alone. We need folks in this forum and on this panel to partner with the Housing Authority to ensure that we continue to touch the most vulnerable people in our community.
Richard, what about from a developer perspective?
Well, I guess I look at it from a different angle, which is people refer to affordable housing, but I think it's not the right way to look at it. It's actually housing that's affordable. And right now we have a housing that's affordable crisis across all the different types of housing, whether it's homeless housing, workforce housing, or single family housing. We have a crisis related to all three of those types of products. And I think people here on this panel kind of touch different parts of that animal. But a new single family house is unaffordable for most folks who traditionally in the 1970s and 80s were able to buy a house, such as somebody who's just graduated from college and 3, 4, 5 years into their work. We're the average age now of first-time home buyers is about 40 years old. So that shows really just this crisis what we have, and it's mostly a scarcity crisis, which is there's just not enough chairs for everybody to be able to sit in.
Gina, how about you from a homeowner's perspective?
Well, good morning. Hello. So thank you, first of all, for this opportunity to speak. And Richard's absolutely right. The first-time homeowner right here, 40 years old, bought my house. The gap who's not being served right now are my 20-somethings who can absolutely, they have qualified for a traditional mortgage, but because of his income and his age, cannot get into his first starter home, right? So he's doing it the traditional way. I did it through Habitat, and he's still struggling. He's still at home with me because he can. He can be, right? Because we have a safe and affordable house that I was able to purchase through Habitat. So there is a gap. There is a gap. There's also a gap with folks working minimum wage jobs. Now minimum wage is not what it used to be, but I have folks that are my staff right now in their 20s, 30s, and 40s that cannot be first-time homeowners through the traditional sense. So they have to look at other avenues. These other programs have to be out there to support their efforts, and Habitat is one of those. So yeah, there's a huge gap.
Thank you. Dr. Armstead, how about from a perspective of a pastor that's actually leading a housing initiative?
Yes, sir. Thanks so much, Pat. I think that my other panelists have kind of hit the nail on the head. Certainly, we're experiencing a local and national crisis as it relates to housing. Inventory is extremely low. Certainly, those working minimum wage jobs are having challenges with not only affordability, but also just being able to live and work in the same place. A lot of our essential workers are driving 20 to 30 minutes into town to work at various agencies, whether it's Habitat or social services, even our police, firefighters, and things like that. And so certainly there is a concern. And for us as a church, we're just in a really unique position because we know the families, we kind of see the generational impact. And we're oftentimes one of the last institutions still trusted in the community to kind of help navigate that housing space.
Thank you. And Angel, how about from the public perspective, how is affordable housing being defined?
So I think Richard, he hit the nail on the head, but the I think it was Ted, the standard definition for affordable housing is 30% or less of your income being used each month for, mortgage or rent or utilities. And to take that just a step further, I think the folks that are being missed for us are people that at the 30% area median income and below. So, if you need a house or rent a unit for $1,000 or less, we're not, in a lot of ways, we're not taking care of those folks. So that's where we see a huge need for affordable housing.
Let me follow up with that one. So, what are the biggest gaps in our housing options today, and how are rising rental and home ownership costs affecting people's ability to stay housed and stable? And Angel, since you went last time, I'll let you tackle that one first.
Yeah, so the affordability crisis is real for the city of Winston-Salem as well as Forsyth County. We have at last, and I'm going to talk about the homeless and then I'm going to talk about some other, but 600 and some odd, 676 people and we think that that was a point in time count, but we think that there's certainly more homeless folks than that. But to Richard's good point, that affordability, we need to have housing that people can afford, as he said, and that cuts across all income areas. So, Pat, I hope that answers your question, but I'll let somebody else go, and then I'll plug in.
All right, Richard, she referred to you. How do you feel about that? Gaps in our housing options.
And part of it is just pure sheer volume that we need. And there's multiple different statistics that people look at, but generally they refer to about 14,000 units that we're lacking. And if you look at the mayor's goal of doing 700 and some units a year, I mean, that's between all housing units itself. It's a huge amount of footprint we're talking about. We did it for the Folks for Good Housing. We did an analysis and basically showed if we did traditional single family houses, which were 6 per acre, you would actually have to replace the whole business district of downtown just to fit into that 14,000. And when you figure out adding in the multifamily side, actually we have a circle that goes all the way from downtown Winston-Salem out to Forsyth Tech, is the footprint of just building units at the density that we're building stuff right now. So it's a what type of money do we have to build this stuff? It's also where do we put another footprint that big in our community to make sure that folks have the ability to be close to their jobs.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Armstead, how about from your perspective? Biggest gaps in the housing?
Sure. I think, again, people want to live where they work. And, to Richard's point about that footprint, even out to Forsyth Tech puts people a little distance away. And so you're factoring in, transportation costs, you're factoring in commute time, you're factoring in all of that as it relates to just finding affordable housing. And then, we'll talk about this later. I think that in addition to that, the wraparound services that undergird those individuals who are trying to find affordable housing in Winston-Salem and in Forsyth County is much needed. And, I'll share a little bit about that a little more later in our conversation.
Okay. Gina, you talked about finding affordable housing for our next generation of folks. Is that generally how you see the biggest gaps in our housing?
I do. I mean, there's several gaps, right? Again, land and space to Richard's point for sure. But yes, the younger generation or the first time homeowners, homeowners trying to navigate and qualify for mortgage loans. It's tough. It's tough, and they need services and they need a path to get there. Habitat's one of those. I know we have several through the city. There's several folks trying to fill that need, but the amount that we need, the sheer volume, again, that we need, that folks that need those services are not getting them. And then it's a challenge to just simply get it out there that we do these kind of things, right? Folks don't even know about them sometimes as much as we in this field are well versed in it. It just isn't getting to the folks who need it.
Thank you. And Ted, I'm ending with you on this one. I know you deal a lot with this issue. So what do you seeing as the gaps?
Yeah, and I think the panel really hit the nail on the head. It's the lack of units, right? So for the Housing Choice Voucher Program and funding for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, we have 5,000 participants on the wait list for our public housing program, we have 16,000 unduplicated families on the wait list. We just don't have the housing stock to get those folks, safe, decent, affordable housing.
Well, and
Are
I think Pat,
Right.
sometimes it's tough. The numbers are tough to visualize because 14,000 or 20,000 or 6,000 seems like, how do you visualize that as housing? But probably the best thing to do is with Peters Creek, we just finished 62 units at the Academy in Peters Creek, and that's 62 units. If you visualize it, you basically take that property, do one of those a month for every month for your foreseeable future. And then in reality, if you look at the footprint, you take that property, go from basically the Peters from the Parkway all the way down to when you get down to I can just visualize the shopping center now, but to basically take all of Pear Tree Corridor, that would be 1 year's worth of housing that we would have to create, just the footprint wise, just to give everyone an idea on that side.
But Richard, let's continue to follow up with you on that one. From a developer's perspective, what are the biggest barriers to creating affordable housing, and what policy changes can make a difference?
Right now, it's just scarcity, and we have a kind of a toilet paper issue related to every component of building something in our community and across this country. We just finished the analysis earlier this week related to construction costs because we've been trying to make sure, because my view of the world is you got to open your eyes and look at the reality. You can't just think, okay, it's going to get better. And we did an analysis, and we had done Essex Place out by Haynes Mall, which was 48 units of workforce. But basically that same product 4 years ago it basically is 100%, the cost is 100% higher than it was 4 years ago. And at the same time, when you look at our median income for Winston-Salem and for Forsyth County, our median income hasn't doubled. So folks, we basically are outstripping what people can afford related to units. And on the same time, on the scarcity is basically construction costs are so expensive right now. Everyone always likes to get into the land and try to think the land's the site. The land's not really the issue as much as the construction costs and just the scarcity of buying doors and all the different components that you need just to build a house or an apartment.
And is a building prices getting, so are they getting tremendously worse, or?
Well, it's basically what's happened is we've ended up having all these different businesses consolidated into single ones. So like a perfect example, and I know this is like nuts and bolts, but is bathroom and shower enclosures. Something as simple as that. They basically, it used to be there was competing companies that you bought bathtubs from. Well, there's actually one group out there now that sells bathtubs because they bought all the other bathtub people. And so bathtubs are 3 times the price that they were, 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And you can't compete with that. You can't say, okay, where are we going to get some bathtubs from somewhere else? Because that is all the bathtub suppliers that are available. And to make that worse, you have estate agencies and other locations which have official approved bathtubs that you can put into your unit. And so we have no choice but to pay 3 times what the cost is for the bathtubs. And we see that across bathtubs, doors, all these types of components that you have no choice. You have to buy in order to make a new housing unit.
Okay, thank you. We'll go back to Dr. Armstead. You had mentioned you're going to come back to this later. But what role can faith-based organizations play in creating sustainable housing solutions? And what strengths have you found most effective for building partnerships between churches, local government, and community organizations to create these sustainable housing solutions?
Great question, Pat. As I mentioned before, the church is, really in a unique position. We kind of stand at the intersection of trust, land, relationships, and moral responsibility. We sit in the community. We know the families. And again, we're one of those trusted institutions. And so from my perspective, I think the church can contribute, or faith-based communities contribute in 4 specific ways. Number 1 is vision and moral leadership. Helping persons to frame housing not just as an economic issue, but also as a justice issue. Again, decent and affordable housing is foundational to human dignity, right? And so the same way health, education, economic mobility is, I think assets and capacity. Many churches have underutilized land or facilities. And more importantly, we've got convening power, bringing groups together to be able to talk about these issues like housing, being a part of conversations like the one we're engaged in today. And I think the church has functioned, or at least, we at United Metropolitan try to function as a partnership broker, a social architect to be able to serve as a bridge between local government, nonprofits, developers, and residents, helping to align all of our interests. That was the one thing that made Metropolitan Village successful, is that we were able to connect with mission-aligned partners who saw this being more than just housing, but an opportunity to provide wraparound services, whether that be health disparities, education gaps, workforce instability. We were able to partner with organizations that saw that as a need. And those wraparound services, which many of my colleagues on the panelists know, financial literacy, access to services, long-term neighborhood stability, all of those things are key and critical. And so we see ourselves as conveners, we see ourselves as advocates, we see ourselves as land partners. And I would say to other faith-based institutions, again, you don't have to be the developer, but there are things that you can bring to the table in partnership with a developer that really could help bridge this gap and hopefully, as Richard said earlier, address the scarcity issue and get some more units, out there for persons to live in and live in with dignity.
Just
Yeah,
as a,
churches are a huge opportunity, and they're also a great breeding ground to kind of try and get other type of housing to work, because they have additional land, they have it. But unfortunately, a lot of our zoning code doesn't allow you to put housing units onto a parking lot for a church, because they're zoned different qualifications. So I think it's a place that what they've done at Metropolitan Village is wonderful. But I think we probably should say, okay, if we have some other churches that have some parking lots, what would it take for us to change the rules of Winston-Salem and Forsyth County for us to put basically some units into the parking lots? And when they're used a couple times a month or a couple of times a week, wouldn't it be great if we could have parishioners who live in the parking lot, live in houses in the parking lot? Because unfortunately, we got too many people in the parking lots in their cars living. But at the same time, I think that would be a great case study to kind of say, how would we work and change Forsyth County and Winston-Salem's rules to allow us to build that type of product? We tried to do one of those out in Clements, and we hit up against a buzzsaw because the zoning code didn't allow the church to actually build parishioner housing on their campus so that seniors could move there and not have to take up other housing units that younger folks would actually love to have.
And I would just say, Richard, to that, one of the things that we know is that necessity breeds creativity, right? And so to your point about scarcity, I think we've got to get creative. I think we've got to work with local governments and partnerships to see if those policy changes are possible to be able to get those units on the market.
Absolutely. I'm going to switch to Gina again. Gina, can you tell us a little bit about how home ownership has changed economic and emotional stability for you and your family, and what support made the biggest difference along that journey?
Oh, goodness. Okay. Yeah, and I'm going to try to do this without tearing up, but every time I tell my story, I get a little emotional, so forgive me in advance. Home ownership for myself and my family has afforded me liberties that I never knew I had or needed or wanted. Right. So 5 years ago, when I bought my Habitat house through Habitat, I was actually able 6 months later to change jobs. I'm focused on a career now that gets to serve more families. I'm supporting a mission that gets to give people the opportunity that I have now, right? So that was huge. The liberties that I get to do now, I am going back to school to finish my degree. Finally, I have my 2-year degree. I'm finishing my 4-year degree, which has been a long-term goal of mine. I have savings. I'm putting in the maximum amount I can in my 401k. Simple things like that. I get to travel a little more with my 20 somethings. We get to have experiences together. Our bond as a family unit has changed, and I get to support them in all of their efforts, right? So I mentioned earlier, my middle child, my 20-something, um, is qualified for a mortgage loan traditionally, right? So he's going to start looking if he can find affordable housing in his income bracket, right? So I get to help him through that journey. My oldest child is in Charlotte, living his best life, doing his adult things, and then my youngest child is still at home with me, figuring it out. But again, because I have a safe, affordable house, which I am in right now, my biggest worry this morning was where to set up the camera for the Zoom. I am warm, I am safe, and we are growing. We went from surviving, literally like just surviving, paycheck to paycheck, and struggling sometimes to find food and put food on the table, to thriving. We are thriving as a family unit, and the experiences that we get to have moving forward, yeah, are just magical. And
That's
yeah.
as I was saying, inspiration. I'm thinking now I should have left that one for the very last. You should have been the last comments on the panel. But
I know, because she's
that
going to
would have
make
been a
all of
great.
us cry.
That's right. But it would be a great one to
Thank
close
you,
it up with.
Gina.
But
Yes.
I'm going to move to Ted for just a minute for the next question. Then, what role does public housing play in bridging the affordability gaps, and how is Aspire adapting to changing demographics?
Yeah, thank you for that, Pat. So, as I mentioned before, Aspire, we can't do it alone. We need partners, we need developers, we need faith-based groups to come to the table too, to kind of have that conversation. But some of the things that we're doing, we've partnered with the city. We have a choice initiative. We just closed on phase 2 and phase 3. So phase 2 incorporates 72 units and phase 3 is 42 units. We'll be building 142 units that are mixed income. That's kind of one of the things we're doing. We're able to offer project-based vouchers for developers that are developing properties. We just partnered with residents at Indiana. They're building 180 units. We have 51 project-based vouchers going into that to help cash flow. These deals are razor thin to make happen. So those project-based vouchers help. And then also on that deal, we did some bond financing that goes through a public hearing, goes through our board, goes through to the city for approval. And then we're able to give borrowers a cheaper rate on their dollars. So those are the kind of things that we're working on. And demographics, we're always looking at what is the population, what is the clientele, and we're trying to do more 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and even some studios. We're not seeing these large families that we've seen in the past. So those big units, those 4 bedrooms, are really we're shrinking those based on what the demographics and what our need is. So that's kind of the angle that we're pursuing right now. And again, anybody that wants to partner with Aspire, please come to the table. We want to partner with you folks.
Thank you. Angel, share with us a little bit about the city's long-term vision for housing affordability and how that intersects with our economic development goals.
All right, Pat, thank you for that question. So the city has a vision of creating 25,000 housing units over the next 20 years, and that is through something in partnership with the county through our planning department called Forward 2045. So we plan to work with developers to use the LIHTC multifamily development along with our city properties that we run through our affordable housing program to reach this goal. So I want to make sure that I mention Michael Blair. He is our housing development director now that we recently hired about 6 months ago. He came to us from PTRC. We're going to work to build this housing of anytime, that you build housing that supports economic development because, folks need housing. We can put money into housing from 80% and below, according to state code. We have the ability to do multi levels of housing. We want to ensure housing is available for all types of folks, all across all income spectrums, so that when employers move here, we have the housing that's ready for them. So Richard talked about, so all levels of housing, so comprehensive housing strategy, but we're looking to do that through 2045, forward 2045, I should say. And I'll end it there, Pat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is the city and the county collaborating on planning and implementing housing initiatives?
Yes, I referenced it, 2045, Forward 2045. And one of the other ways we are working together with the county, we have a joint city-county planning department. And through that, we want to, Richard knows this hopefully, that I've heard since I've been here a little over a year and a half that we're relatively easy to work with. And we want to become easier to work with, and certainly are want to hear from developers like yourself, Richard, when you're talking about those type of projects that you referred to and the need for us to get out of the way. So that is one of the goals that we have. We could recently work with the county to prepare some of our citizens to become first-time homeowners. We have a first-time homeowners buyers program wherein we provided them with money. I actually think we're out of money right now, but we did partner with the county to do that. And then I hope we can work with the county on a transitional housing program modeled after something called Tampa Hope that we saw in Tampa. I first saw it in 2024. I think Pat saw it last year. We went down there, and the city council gave us the go-ahead to look for a site for this transitional housing program. And we hope to be able to, as the pastor said, work to provide services on site at that site, and we're trying to find a location now. So we've worked in partnership with the county tremendously, and I look forward to working with them even more.
Thank you.
Pat, I just to interject on that, I think we need to make housing as easy to build approval wise and system wise as it is to do storage units or to do a warehouse or do other types of products. Right now, across the country, it's very difficult to get housing approved, both from community support and from just going through the systems of getting approvals, both on the statewide and the local side of it.
Okay.
And Pat, can I just interject in something that I forgot? The affordable housing program that we do. So I wanted to name that, and I want folks to know that if they're interested in that, we're going to let out an RFP, developers for multifamily development within the next probably week or two. So I didn't want to leave without mentioning that.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Ted, I'm gonna come back to you for a second. As Winston-Salem grows, how do we keep housing development aligned with community needs and ensure equitable access to all without displacing long-term residents? Because I know that's an issue that you face.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I think we're referring to Crystal Towers. Obviously, the Housing Authority never wants to displace any of our participants or our residents from their home. As you folks may have known, we did a comprehensive needs assessment, and the tally came back at over $40 million of repairs that are needed at Crystal Towers. I had plenty of resident meetings with resident council and with some of the residents out at the building and kind of explained there's a couple of paths, right? If we do the redevelopment, they're going to be required to be relocated. If we partner with another developer, they're still going to be required to be relocated. There's federal protections. It's called the Uniform Relocation Act. And I explained that to resident council and some of the residents. There's protections out there that ensure that we provide adequate notice, that we provide tenant protection vouchers for each of these individuals, that we get all of their moving expenses taken care of. We get utilities turned on. We have a moving coordinator that they'll be assigned to that will help them get to a new unit that's safe, decent, and affordable. During this whole process, there'll be a lot of open communication with the residents to ensure that we're meeting their needs when it comes to the Uniform Relocation Act. And I've mentioned to residents, this is not going to be a quick process. The statute only requires a 90-day notice. My thing is that, I said it's going to be between 12 to 18 months of a process to go through. So we're in the process. We had a resident council election, getting this new resident council on board, getting with our board here at Aspire to start coordinating those meetings, to have those discussions about what it looks like moving forward. But there are protections in place. Our residents will have an opportunity to come back to the site when the site is developed and complete. So, we're doing everything we can to ensure that our residents have a place to go.
Thank you. Richard, how about from your perspective?
I guess part of it, and so I'm probably saying what for Ted's group, because I used to do for Kevin's side of it, is the federal government's been trying to get out of housing for the last 20 years. And basically, they started off 20 years ago taking all the Section 8 project-based housing that was, traditionally you look at where Metropolitan Village, the new complexes exists. The old one was vacated because of the federal government turning off the money to support those units. And basically, they started as market rate units first, which was a lot of the stuff that was built in the 1960s, 70s, lost money and lost the ability to support themselves and to provide decent housing for the community in those locations. And then in the last 10 years, they've basically been turning off the money for the different housing authorities. So we work across the state with housing authorities who basically are saying, my job used to be administering Section 8. It's now I have to be a private developer who can make these things work with no subsidy whatsoever. And that's a different business model. It's like trying to tell, the Baptist, medical that they need to be, they need to be a car dealership. It's a different animal. And at the same time, and what it's affecting is basically all these folks who call these places home are finding that so many of these units are boarded up, and they're not boarded up because they couldn't continue to be operated. It's basically that the ability to keep them financially running has come to an end, and the costs to replace or fix or bring it up there's no vehicle to pay for that.
And if I could just piggyback off that, Pat, real quick, what Richard's saying, the THUD bill, I'm looking at the THUD bill, there's a $789 million decrease in the public housing operating fund. So that means less staff, less materials, less things that we can do at these public housing facilities. And as you know, our public housing facilities are 53 years old. They're high rises. They're difficult to manage. They're difficult to repair.
Absolutely. Dr. Armstead, I'm going to give you the last word on this one too, because I think your project is seen as one that is really back in the community that's helping to reverse that displacement of long-term residents.
Yes, and we, have been very fortunate in that regards, because oftentimes, as many of you on this panel know, that when development starts happening, the first thing that is on the hearts and minds of community members is displacement, or that taboo word gentrification comes up, right? That you're moving people out. Thankfully for Metropolitan Village, we did not have any displacement. We were able to shift those few remaining tenants over into the new buildings that we have now. But that's a challenge, and I certainly understand that. As we often hear, persons are resistant to change. But the reality is, and I'll say for those of us that have gathered here, we know that the resistance to change isn't about the change; it's about the loss, right? It is about the loss of what I called home, and now I'm entering into a new space. And though it may be new and updated, it is still new. And I think some persons are resistant to that. But I think we're all working diligently to manage helping persons to transition from out of old, dilapidated or deteriorating spaces into new spaces. And that's not an easy fix. That's not an overnight fix. I think that's a long-term problem that we have to find sustainable solutions to. And that comes from, what I heard Ted say, meeting with the public, meeting with those residents, having community conversations, hearing their needs, operating with some level of empathy, and not just to the letter of the policy that has been written. And in order for us to do that, there's got to be collaboration, there's got to be creativity. And so I think persons on this panel and others throughout our community are open to that collaboration, but we know that oftentimes that takes time, and many of our residents' time is the very thing that they don't have. And so let's keep working together to make that possible. But I think we were able to get it done at Metropolitan Village. But I will say that before hammers and nails and earth moving equipment was on the ground, as Richard knows, there was a lot of groundwork that had to be done before we got to that place. And so I say let's continue to go to work.
Well, and Pat, to that point, came up in Winston-Salem Rise, and also Folks for Good Housing, is one of the ways to take off the pressure from some of the existing communities is to overbuild luxury housing or other places in the community. Because what's happening is that when you go into a lot of these neighborhoods, people Perfect example of that is Patterson, which is if you go into the Bel Air neighborhood over there, if there's enough pressure that 20 somethings can't buy houses in Ardmore or some of these other traditional starter home neighborhoods, they're going to go into Bel Air and other places and say, wait a second, this is some undervalued product that if I can't find product elsewhere, then you end up going into existing communities and messing up. And just as was just mentioned, is perfect. That throws it off. So in some sense, if we built, 10,000 units, some other location that, a 27-year-old from NC State could buy a house, they're not going to get as creative as going into some existing neighborhoods and messing up the dynamics of those existing neighborhoods.
Absolutely. I think we're into the point we're supposed to get taking some questions from the folks that are in attendance. We only have about 5 minutes left, and I think I've got 50 questions, so we're not going to get to very many of those. But there was a couple of things one I'm going to bring up is there's a question about a housing tax. I know other communities have these. Winston-Salem had one in the past and didn't have one currently. There's a question is, could a housing tax or bond facilitate the building of more housing? Angel, I guess I'll throw that one to you first.
Yes, absolutely. We're actually looking at that as an option as communities around us, Raleigh, Durham, Wake County have all done those. So I think, as the Reverend and Richard said, we'll be having conversations about that. The city council has to decide, the mayor and the manager, whether to put that forward, and you'll be hearing something from us in the next year or so. So yes, absolutely. I think when we looked at tax, I think it would generate something like $4 million a year for us. So we're entertaining that.
Yeah, one of the crazy ways you can do that actually is what South Carolina does, which is if you're an out-of-state owner of a parcel, there's a different tax rate on housing. And I think we've lost a lot of our communities right now because we've had big hedge funds and other people buy out whole entire neighborhoods, and they're running them as apartment buildings. And if we tax those folks differently than a 35-year-old who works at Atrium, I think that would help us kind of take off some of the loss of the supply by having it sucking into these big hedge funds.
And I'll step out of role for just a minute and remind everyone that what they do in South Carolina, we cannot do in North Carolina unless the general.
I'm sure we can, but it's all laws, and we can change laws.
The laws can be changed. I'm going to need you to lobby your state legislators to bring that one about. But there's several questions in here about funding and capacity to build housing, and where's that funding coming from? So anybody have thoughts on, I know we talked about the federal government's getting out of this. Our local government funds are short and in supply, and we're working on getting more of those. What are the other funding options that might be out there?
Churches.
Yeah.
Crowdsourcing the local community to fill in the gap is actually a very successful model that you've seen here with Metropolitan Village, and also Charlotte has a ton of housing that's being created by mega churches, basically coming up with multi-million-dollar gaps to fill in this, because with the logic of keeping their parishioners, give them a place to live.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Pastor.
No, I just was going to say, to Richard's point, that is true. I mean, churches have a unique position in the community, are able to raise funding, but certainly when we're able to, partner with private equity and things of that nature, it allows those dollars to go much further. And so, as I mentioned earlier, being a convener, bringing persons together to be able to make that happen is key and critical. And I think that when we talk about, at least from a faith-based standpoint, being holistic, that housing is, have a lot to do with safety, with all of those things. So we want to make sure that we are just reaching persons, not necessarily from the spiritual standpoint, but from a practical, everyday, needs-based assessment as well.
Yeah, and I think the second one would be businesses. Is we have, if you go back 100 years to the 1920s, when you build a mill, you build mill housing. You almost have to get to this point where, Peters Creek's a perfect example. We have atriums right there. And we did analysis for folks for good housing. And, over 70% of the folks that work in and at the hospital there actually qualify for workforce housing, which is so. So in some sense, if you start teaming up with some of these employers and give them options, because they need housing in order for them to justify having the jobs. And that's kind of a lot of cities have really made that connection before. They actually are growing the housing because they know that grows the jobs and that keeps the city from getting stagnant and not being able to grow.
Okay. Angel, do you want to add?
Yeah, Richard hit the point because I was going to say employers. I know of an opportunity, well, back in Durham, where I think Duke put in some money for a affordable housing project that they helped build. So for their employees. And also they were giving employees assistance and down payment assistance in order to get into the house as well. So there are many, innovative strategies. And another thing I saw was making housing smaller. Because to the Reverend's point, I think Ted said it. You no longer need 4-bedroom houses. My husband and I, it's just the two of us, so we could live in a small unit. So building small homes, tiny homes. There are those for rent. There are those to buy. I've seen some examples in Atlanta and in Clarkston, Georgia, where they built some beautiful homes to purchase that are smaller. So lots of innovative ways and solutions that we can tackle this with.
All right, I think we're right about out of time. So the one last question I was going to just throw out, but only could take a 1 minute response is the question is, how do we fight NIMBYism or the not in my backyard syndrome? Anybody got a solution to that one?
I'd love to.
I think we.
Let me just
go ahead,
say,
Angel.
I'll make it quick. I will make it very quick. I think educating folks, the pastor made the point about really telling people what you're trying to do and explaining that. I tried to build one of my first affordable houses back in 2013 in Goldsboro, and we got killed because we didn't let folks know what affordable housing was. They thought, and I hate to use the terminology, but old school projects is what they were thinking when we were getting ready to build beautiful affordable housing units with DHIC out of Raleigh. So I think education on the front end is really important. And Richard, I'm sorry if Pat was.
Richard, final comment, or did she cover it?
Well, I think what you need to do is make sure everybody on the elected side and city staff basically tell them that housing has to happen in order for Winston-Salem to continue to grow. And Greensboro is a perfect example right now. They're basically saying anytime they have a property that's going through, they're rolling over the communities. And but they actually are, because they're basically saying if we can't get these jobs at PTI, they need housing in order to get these jobs. So therefore they're saying we're going to make the housing happen. And we got to make sure everyone has the exact same message, which is if you talk to any city council member or any county commissioner, they all have the same story, which is we need housing. We need housing. And we're going to try to figure out however we can to make that happen. I think that's the momentum you need. And that was part of the struggle we had with Folks for Good Housing is we have everybody supports affordable housing, but everybody has reason why housing shouldn't happen in their neighborhood. And that's where I always kind of leave a lot of this is have people kind of give a little, people may live differently than you live, but that's not bad housing. That's actually good housing because we need it in this community.
I'm going to have to cut everybody off to turn it back over to Catherine. Thanks you it's been a wonderful discussion. And some of our comments are basically saying we need to continue this on a more consistent basis. So thank you for what you're doing. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your questions that the people were asking, but back to Catherine.
Thank you, Pat. And so now is the time in a webinar where lots of people tend to hit end or leave, but I would say, but wait, there's more. So first of all, there were a tremendous number of really good questions in the Q&A that we were not able to get to because of time. However, we are hosting a Leaders in Lunch webinar in March. So questions that were not answered today will be addressed in March. I believe Jared, my administrative technology and finance director, is putting the link to register for that in the chat right now. A couple of special thanks. Speaking of Jared, I'd like to thank the entire Leadership Winston-Salem team, Frida Mitchell, Denise Smith, Abby McCall, and Jared Stewart for all the work they did to help make this happen. We're a small team, so it's all hands on deck pretty much all the time. I'd also like to specially recognize the class of 2026. One might even refer to them as the best class ever. I've heard it said. So including one of our panelists, two of our panelists, for making such a great presence today. We know that there's a lot going on as a Leadership Winston-Salem class member, and the fact that you took time out of your day to be a part of this is just super special to us. Also, special thanks to Pat Pate. It is not easy moderating a panel with 5 people, but you did a beautiful job of it. So my thanks to you. And a special thanks to Gina as well for sharing her story, her personal story. I think it's always good to hear how things like affordable housing impact people just like us every single day. And what happens to any of our neighbors should matter to all of our neighbors. So that being said, I'm going to move on to my formal comments. As we begin to wrap up, I want to start by sincerely thanking each of our panelists for sharing their expertise, experiences, and perspectives today. And thank you to everyone in the audience for your thoughtful engagement and attention. Our special thanks again go to our elected officials for joining us today, with special recognition to County Commissioner Malashay Woodbury, whom I did not recognize in my opening remarks. Conversations like this are stronger because of the voices in the room. Today, we heard that affordable housing isn't just a definition, it's a reality shaped by income, rising costs, and access. We discussed the gaps in our current housing system, from rental shortages to pathways to home ownership, and we are reminded that no single sector can solve this challenge alone. Meaningful progress requires collaboration across government, nonprofit organizations, developers, faith communities, employers, and residents. In other words, it takes a village. While today's conversation doesn't end the work, it does point us towards next steps. If you're looking for ways to stay involved, we encourage you to volunteer with local nonprofits or serve on the city's Affordable Housing Coalition, support affordable housing by shopping at the Habitat Restore, and follow the Forsyth County Humane Housing Network to stay informed and engaged. We're grateful that you joined Leadership Winston-Salem's annual community conversation. This event benefits our Leadership Winston-Salem Scholarship Fund, which helps ensure that leadership development opportunities are accessible to individuals across our community. At this time, I'd like to invite Alan Shelton from Flagship Class of 2026 to share more about the fund and what it's meant to him. Alan?
Well, thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so I first learned of Leadership Winston-Salem in 2012, but at that time in my life, I had just left a 20-year career and was trying to figure out, again what I'm going to be when I grow up, when I was 40 years old. So in between 2012 and this year, I graduated from Forsyth Tech, enrolled in Salem College, started Mixer Community Makerspace, and another business I just didn't have time, but also I didn't really have the money to join Leadership Winston-Salem. And last year, Catherine called me and told me about a scholarship opportunity, and I applied immediately. And I was lucky enough to be awarded a scholarship. So one of the things that I've learned in my work at Mixer Community Makerspace is if you don't find ways to include people who wouldn't have the chance to be involved in your space, in your program, involved in your life, then they don't have the opportunity to make an impact on your life. And one of the things that I've heard over and over again over the years is how Winston-Salem is siloed and people live in their little bubbles. And I think that's pretty much everywhere. But one of the things that breaks down those silos is finding ways to include people who wouldn't normally be able to be included. And the scholarship program of Leadership Winston-Salem has allowed me to be included in something that's very important to me, something I wanted to be a part of for a long time. And now I get a chance to do it. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful to the people who made that possible.
Thank you, Alan, for sharing your story. If you'd like to support future leaders, we invite you to use the link that is being put in the chat now to make a donation to the Leadership Winston-Salem Scholarship Fund. Every contribution helps expand access to leadership development in our community. Thank you again for being a part of today's conversation. We hope to see you at future Leadership Winston-Salem events and encourage you to stay involved in local housing initiatives. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe.